Researchers estimate that the average adult native speaker knows about 10,000 words in their native language, depending on how you define a word. So how do we as foreign language learners acquire all of that vocabulary? Before I talk about specific techniques, I want to make a couple of observations and talk general principles. First observation. There are different kinds of vocabulary words. There's cognates, words that sound the same and mean the same in both languages. So computer, for instance, in Japanese means computer, at least last time I checked. There are false cognates like soportar in Spanish, which seems like it should mean to support, but it actually means to tolerate, or lectura in Spanish, which seems like it should mean a lecture, but it actually means a reading. There are words with simple one-to-one translations that you can use pretty much in the same way that you use the word in English, like the word silla in Spanish, meaning chair in English. As far as I know, you can pretty much use that just like you use the word chair. There are high-frequency words, words that you use all the time. If you're listening, reading, speaking, you're going to be using these words and you're going to learn them pretty quickly. And there are low-frequency words, words that you don't encounter very often, but maybe you need in a particular setting or a particular circumstance, but you just don't come across them very often. There are abstract words and concrete words. There are words where the meaning can be derived from the different parts. And there are words where it's impossible to do that. It's just a big chunk and you can't figure out what the word means just from looking at the word. How easily you learn a word and even how you should learn a word depends a little bit on the kind of word it is. High frequency words and cognates are going to be very, very easy to learn, to come across. Abstract words, low frequency words, false cognates, words without equivalents. All of these are going to be a little bit harder to learn, and you might consider doing something a little bit different to learn them. There are words that don't map cleanly onto the divisions that we have in English. A word like take in English, for instance, has such a wide variety of different uses. You can take a walk, you can take that bag, you can take a hike, you can take a photo, you can take something for granted. And so if you're learning English as a foreign language, take is not a word that is going to fall cleanly within the divisions of words that you have in your language. This brings me to an important principle. Thinking in terms of one-to-one translations is usually not a good thing. It can work for basic nouns, but languages just express meaning in different ways. And relying on one-to-one translations or thinking that vocabulary is about one-to-one translations is deceptive for a lot of different words. It's a little more helpful to think in terms of chunks of words together, words that often come up together or words that are used in the same kind of phrase or a certain construction that comes up frequently, which brings me to another observation. Vocabulary goes beyond words. There are idiomatic expressions like take for granted that we just looked at. There's frequently used phrases or constructions like it's hard to do something, it's easy to do something. And an individual word might occur with other words very frequently. So if we think about the word chew, for instance, probably are going to be using words like food or bite or easy to chew or hard to chew or something. The likelihood of hearing those words goes up if you hear the word chew. And just knowing the dictionary meaning of the word is not the same as knowing how that word is used. Knowing that one of the meanings of the word hard in English is difficult doesn't necessarily tell you that the phrase hard to do something is a pretty common occurrence. It's hard to hit, it's hard to catch, it's hard to learn, it's hard to avoid. I guess to repeat what I've already said twice now, maybe. It's not just individual words that we need to focus on, it's patterns of the expression. A lot of times you can understand how to use an overall expression, but not know what the individual words might mean in that expression. Even in the expression take for granted, for instance, if you told me to explain why take for granted means what it does, as a native English speaker, I would have a hard time saying that. I just use it because I know what the meaning of the phrase is, and I think that the people who are listening to me talking know what the meaning of the phrase is. But expressions of meaning do not always need to be individually picked apart to death. Okay, Third observation, there are different levels of vocabulary knowledge. People will say things like,
I know 100 vocabulary words.
But that is a very simplistic way of talking and thinking. Now, maybe you can only recognize a word if you see it and then remember what it means. Maybe you know the rough English equivalent without prompting. Maybe you can use it correctly and in some example sentences. Maybe you're skilled at using it at socially appropriate times. Maybe you can use it with irony or in jokes or in combination with other words to express new concepts. Maybe you knew the word at one point and have forgotten it completely, but it'll be easy to learn the word again. Maybe you never learned the word before, but you can quickly figure out what it means because you understand the parts of the word and what their likely meanings are. So you can kind of make an educated guess as to what the word means. Maybe I've said this more than once already, but it's not about just remembering the dictionary definition of the word. It's about deepening your skills at using words and patterns of words to express meaning. Back to principles again. You should leverage prior knowledge if you can. Now, earlier I talked about a word being easier to use because of something about the word itself. But how easy a word is to learn also has something to do with the learner. Right? Words are easier to learn if we already know something about them to begin with. Let me tell you a quick story. When I was first learning Chinese, I would see a new word, get excited, and put it in my handy-dandy flashcard app. I was on the street and I saw someone with a hat that said "Ji Du Ye Su." Now this combination of sounds and these characters mean Jesus Christ. And so I was like, oh, cool, I'll put that in my flashcard app and that's cool. As the flashcard came up again and again, I would frequently forget what these words meant. I had struggled with the characters. I just struggled remembering this. And part of the problem was that basically every one of these characters is new to me. I knew a little bit of pieces of some of them. And I don't use the words Jesus Christ that often in everyday conversation when I was living in Taiwan. I don't use them in English that often either. So trying to learn the words Jidu, Yesu, it was probably not a good idea for me at that time because I didn't have that much prior knowledge. I had to learn all of these 4 characters as a chunk just to learn one new word. But I was also having conversations with other people and I learned a similar word, Jidu Jiao. Jidu Jiao is Christianity in Chinese. For some reason, this word was a lot easier to learn than Jidu Yesu. I already knew that there was a general format of having some characters with Jiao at the end and that meaning a religion. So Jidu Jiao made sense to me. Also, I already knew Jiao. Jiao was a character I already knew pretty well. And so really, I'm only learning like 2 new characters. So before, all of the characters are new. I'm trying to learn all these 4 characters at once. But in the Jidu Jiao situation, not only do I understand why the characters are arranged the way they are, but only 2/3 of the characters are new to me. This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying develop vocabulary based on what you already know. I wish I would have gone back in time and been like,
hey man, don't put Jidu Yesu in your flashcard app. You don't need that. You're never going to talk about that. Wait until it becomes relevant to you.
Wait until you already know. If I learn Jidu Jiao first, then Jidu Yesu becomes that much easier to learn. Now, in many Indo-European languages, and probably a lot of other languages, I'm not really sure, root words serve the same kind of function that radicals and characters might serve in Chinese or in Japanese. For instance, bicycle, cyclical, cyclone, tricycle, unicycle, right? All those are using the psych root. So there's something similar about them. If you know a couple of them, then learning the next one is that much easier. You don't have to learn everything from scratch again. Another principle that I think is important here. Learn words by examples in relevant contexts, not by definitions only. People act sometimes like knowing the dictionary definition of the word is what knowing a word actually means. But the dictionary definition is just a best guess approximation of the meaning of the word. It doesn't really tell you how the word is used in everyday conversation and where are appropriate times to use the word. Does it sound like you're from the 18th century if you use this word? Does it sound like you are a member of the upper crust? Does it sound like you're a heathen? What does it sound like? An app like Pleco for Chinese language learning has a lot of examples that come with the definitions, and those examples are really, really helpful. A lot of times I go to the examples first to see how the word is being used, and then the dictionary definition is kind of unnecessary by that point. We've made some observations, we've talked about principles. Now I'm going to talk about 3 different techniques in language learning and how to use these techniques. So the first, as you might guess, is flashcards. So basic flashcards are good for words that have very clear one-to-one mappings from one language to the other. But if you just use them in a basic way, like I put the word on the front side and I put the dictionary definition on another, and that's my primary source of learning vocabulary, I don't think it's going to be all that effective for you. Another way of using flashcards would be to prompt you to work with the word. So let's say you get a flashcard with a new word on it, and you have to use that word in a sentence. You write a couple sentences with that word, or you take a bunch of words, coming up with sentences and saying them with that word in them, or with that construction in them. That involves practicing a skill that's much closer to the skill that you want to acquire, which is to be able to use words naturally to express meaning. Instead of using words as cues, you could also use topics or situations as cues. Like, hey, you're here at the doctor's office. What words are going to come up at the doctor's office? What are useful constructions at the doctor's office? Maybe come up with a handful of sentences that you're going to explain to the doctor that you're sick. This is a more free recall style of retrieval, which I think is going to benefit you more than just doing the cued recall of a standard basic flashcard. But whatever the method, ideally, you want to be going beyond the flashcards very, very quickly. You want to be seeing those words in context. So you want to be reading material with those target words in them. You want to be using those words in conversation with other people. If you're not using the words, then having them in your flashcard app is kind of it's not really serving you that well. Second strategy, reading and listening to a lot of comprehensible input has got to be part of the strategy. Comprehensible input, if you don't already know, is listening or reading to stuff that is just a little bit beyond your current level. So where you understand most of what you are hearing, there's going to be some new vocabulary words, some new constructions, but getting to the level where you can read something or listen to something and understand 80%, 90% of what you are hearing is ideally what you want to be shooting for. And there are so many advantages to using comprehensible input to learn a language, learn the constructions and the new vocabulary words. You're encountering words in their natural contexts where they commonly co-occur with other words in a situation that is appropriate for them. You're learning words through examples and not through definitions. Often you can figure out a tentative meaning from context, and then you might look up that word to see further examples of the word in use. You can always learn more about the word later. You don't have to learn everything about every new word that you encounter. With comprehensible input, words come up naturally in groups and chunks, and so often you are using prior knowledge as part of the learning process to understand the words and constructions more deeply. But you also want to be testing out new words and new constructions as much as possible in what's called pushed output. And this is where you extend what you've been learning through flashcards or through comprehensible input or some mixture of courses and stuff that you're taking into the real world, into realistic contexts, and seeing the response that you get from people. You're not just copying and repeating what you've read. You're using words to express meaning. And then you get to see the response from other people about what you've said. Are they giving you funny looks? Do they understand what you said? Are they rephrasing what you said using other more appropriate vocabulary words? Are they replying to the wrong question? Is there some miscommunication going on? The goal here is to avoid plateauing. It's to avoid defaulting to the same words, the same phrases that you use all the time. Advancing your language skills means you have to keep exploring the language and playing with it. The more cycles that you get of this process, of learning new words or chunks of words, trying to learn from examples and moving from what you already know, and then expressing those words in realistic contexts, the smoother the vocabulary acquisition is going to go. For more insights into language learning, and especially if you're trying to learn Chinese, check out these 2 language learning channels. Here I talk to William Hart, who runs a great channel on Chinese language learning, and here I talk to Daniel of the Chinese is Hard podcast on learning foreign languages and trying to apply the research on learning to language learning. Check it out. It's a great conversation that we have, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.